Good morning. It's hard shoes to fill to follow Amitabh Kant, so I hope that I can keep you as energized as he was able to with his very inspirational remarks. Happy Teachers' Day. I think all of us are here because of our teachers, and I think it's important to spare a thought for them on a day like this. I think I often believe that all of us are so privileged to have had the education that we've had, and there are so many people in our country who don't get the kind of education that we do, that it's almost an obligation for all of us to go out and teach. And so if you can indulge me in a message to you on a day like this, it is to make sure that you sometime take time out and go and teach. In the old brick and mortar model or in the online model, I think we still need lots of teachers. Either way, the education that we have, we can only give back what we have by imparting it to others. So I hope you keep that in mind. Thank you very much for asking me to speak here. This is a great initiative, and I say this because I've been involved in education now for almost 20 years in India, and I used to also bring out an education magazine, as some of you know here. I've spoken at many education conferences. The challenge I always find in conferences like this is that given the scale of the education that we have to provide in our own country, these discussions always become about all the problems that we have. And I call it, driving by looking in the rearview mirror. When we all know, and as Pankaj started out by saying, that there is just no way that we are going to solve our education challenges by building brick and mortar institutions. So I think we need to change the dialogue at some of these events to really looking ahead and to see how we can, to use Mr. Kant's expression, leapfrog. I think India has done that. If you look at what's happened in telecom, if you look at what's happened in aviation, if you look at what's happening in the field of e-business in our country, if you look at what all of you are doing in online learning, I do think that we are leapfrogging, and I think that's what we should focus on. I'd let Mr. Kant and the MHRD solve the old world problems. I think they do need to be solved, but I really think the opportunity for us in forums like this is to look ahead. The topic I was asked to speak on was building the next Ivy League university in India. And that's a very loaded topic. I think the organizers probably picked it to make it easier for me to talk about my own experiences building possibly Ashoka, which often gets compared to Ivy League, prematurely I might add, or ISB. I do want to warn you that you're probably going to get a notice from the Ivy League lawyers. There is, in fact, a law firm that monitors the use of the word Ivy League. And I found out the hard way, because in our first ads that we put out for Ashoka, we very cutely said that we were building a Ivy League quality university in India. So we did add the word quality to try and not suggest that we were anyway trying to build the 9th Ivy League university. And sure enough, within a few months, we got a very strong legal notice, after which we've stopped using that word completely. But jokes apart, it's important to perhaps look at what the word Ivy League really means and why the organizers might have chosen this. And I think there is this angst that we've all had for a long time now, and increasingly now in the last few governments that we've had, starting with our former president, Pranab Mukherjee, who somehow got obsessed with rankings, and now the last two regimes of the BJP NDA government. The Ivy League obviously stands for universities that are really top ranked globally. If you look at the 8 universities, they typically have always been ranked in the top 20, in the top 25. So that's one notion that is very high on people's minds, even in India these days, that we are very keen that we should have some universities that are truly top ranked. And we feel badly about that not happening. I'm going to avoid the trap of talking about our problems, which I said we shouldn't. So I'm going to hold myself a little bit accountable on that. The second thing that you hear a lot about Ivy League universities is that they are meritocratic, but they are also elite. I think one of the trends that Pankaj talked about was the democratization of education. And I do think that this notion of Ivy League is actually under a big challenge today. Can you really build another Ivy League ever again? Shobna and I were lucky enough to go to 2 of these universities, and it was hard to get in there. But you also realize that these universities are not just elite, but they've also become quite elitist over time. And there's an expectation that these graduates will lead society, and that society has to be led by Ivy Leaguers, which is quite a contrast to what Mr. Kant was talking about, that the solutions might actually come from the tinkering labs in the slums. And it's no longer the purview of IIT graduates to actually come up with answers to our problems. So I do think that that aspect of the Ivy League is something that we have to also challenge, and I think all of us here, in terms of what we are doing with education, are challenging that. The Ivy Leagues have also been very well endowed. If you study the Ivy League, the Brown has the lowest endowment of $3.5 billion. Harvard, as some of you may know, has, the last time I checked, an endowment of $37.1 billion. I think we have to challenge that notion as well as we build the Ivy League, if you will, in India. Just so I can share the big disruption that a lot of people don't know about ISB and Ashoka has been that to get the university going and to get it to a certain scale, and since all of you, most of you here from the world of business, to reach operational break even, where you are not burning cash anymore, we spent only $100 million. And so for $100 million today, you can build a brick and mortar university in India that provides a pretty high quality education at a very affordable price, possibly at a price point of $10,000 to $15,000 a year, and generates a surplus that can actually sustain it for a long, long time, even if it cannot have the endowments of the Ivy League that fund its research. But perhaps the most difficult thing about building an Ivy League university is that you really cannot match their age. And this is significant because if you actually look at the Ivy League, the youngest Ivy League university, which is Dartmouth College, is 1865. And then if you go up the next 7 ranks, you'll go up to 1765 or 1760, which is Penn. And then Harvard, of course, claims that they are 1660. Where do you match the legacy that these institutions have? And while I'm not jingoistic about our past, I wish that we still had the Nalandas and the Takshilas and the Vikramshilas around. And that's the one time I do feel a twinge of regret that in our country, we've not been able to sustain our institutions and have gotten stuck in this recent legacy of institutions that we have. What is more significant, though, is that if you look at the last 100 years, there are only 5 or 6 universities that have been born that have actually reached top 100 in the last 100 years. And this is quite remarkable and a very telling statistic. If any of us are trying to build universities, it's almost damning, right? If you look at the youngest university, it's a university in Paris called, I think it's called PSL Research. PSL Research University, which is technically 8 years old, but this was an initiative by the French government to club 5 existing institutions together. So imagine in India, TIFR and IISc and a bunch being put together. And so these 5 institutions were put together, and they suddenly catapulted into the top 50. So they are, if you look at the QS and THE rankings, they would be in the top 50. And they claim 8 years old, but that's really not a valid claim. So if you really look at the youngest universities, I think the 3 are NUS in Singapore, NTU in Singapore, Nanyang Tech, National University of Singapore, the first one, HKUST, the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and the Korean Advanced Institute for Science and Technology. All of these are heavily STEM institutions, massively funded by very rich governments. And so if you put a consultant's 2x2 on public versus private and STEM versus non-STEM, then you are done for. There's no way that you can build an Ivy League university in India in our lifetimes. Okay, that being said, it's not so depressing. I think that the notion, therefore, of an Ivy League university in the current context is something that we all need to think about. And I think the themes for that have in some ways been set by some of the things that Pankaj and Amitabh Kant had to say. I do have my half an hour, right? Yeah, okay. If you really look at why universities were created in the first place, the truth is that school education was about teaching young people the essentials to live their lives. We learned math, language, science, how the world works, how planets revolve around the sun, and so on. And so it was very prescriptive. But university education, when it first started, was not about how education was done in school. In fact, the whole intent was to free you up. The whole intent was to give you an opportunity to finally rise from this very prescriptive way of learning and imparting knowledge to, in fact, find your own voice, to find your own purpose in life, to discover yourself, to be the best that you could be, to find your potential. Now, if you read the mission and vision statements of colleges and universities around the world, you will still see some of these statements. And in fact, you will invariably see these statements, particularly on glossy brochures and websites. But the truth of the matter is, and we know this particularly in places like India, where post-independence, as Mr. Kant himself admitted, we kind of adopted the very Anglo-Saxon way. He's contrasting that with what he's trying to do with his tinkering labs, and I'll come back to that. But we somewhere lost the way on what university education was really about, and it became only about educating people for jobs and skills. Now, as it turns out, we aren't doing a very good job of that either. He mentions the 20% statistics of how many people in India are genuinely employable. Some of the data he's quoted was from Aspiring Minds. I don't know if the folks from Aspiring Minds are here, but they are really filling this gap by saying, how do we take, in some ways, if I may use the word, damaged goods and make them good so that they can be employed. And it's really sad that we have to have intermediaries to lift the quality of education that we are providing in our colleges. So if you really look at where I think the liberal arts, the Ivy League becomes relevant, is the notion of what was traditionally called liberal arts or liberal education. I think that ingredient of the Ivy League is something that is very relevant and continues to be extremely relevant even today. In fact, those are foundational skills. I would argue that we are born with those skills, and our education system kills it. So I am not for a minute against all of you, and I know that several of you are providing hard skills and technical skills and STEM skills, and of course we have to do that. But I do think that alongside that, we have to bring back, through the use of technology or whatever means you are using, brick and mortar or technology or testing or assessment, the focus back to this whole idea of what was traditionally provided by a liberal education, which allowed you to survive and thrive in fast-changing, diverse environments. What Mr. Kant was talking about as making your kids innovative or making them problem solvers. He was using some of this expression quite unknowingly, that he was really talking about the notion of a liberal education. Now, let me just spend a few minutes on this, because most people confuse liberal education as being opposed to a conservative education or a political stance. Unfortunately, at Ashoka, sometimes we get targeted for this as being somehow from the left or something. Or the other more charitable explanation is that people see us as being involved in the performing arts in some way. And that, again, is disservice to the notion of the liberal arts. Interestingly, and if you'll indulge me for a minute, I do want to take us back to the Roman times when the whole idea of liberal education came about, because frankly, again, it's very relevant to where we are today. And it's only for that reason that I'm making this point, and not to show you how great my knowledge is, because frankly, I didn't get a liberal education myself. So in the times of the Romans and the ascendancy of the people like Julius Caesar and so on, who we know of, people were still born into a profession. So if you were born into a family of blacksmiths, then you did that when you grew up. If you were a plumber, you continued to be a plumber. Some people started to feel that that was too restricted, and it almost chained you as an individual. And so to free them up, to liberate them from the confines of your profession, you were to be given a liberal education. And the components of that liberal education in those days had actually 3 parts, and in fact 8 specific subjects. So they were very prescriptive and scientific in their own way about this. So, of course, at the core of it was philosophy. And the reason it was philosophy is because, of course, now that you have to be a free, liberal citizen, liberated from the confines of your profession, then you have to contemplate life. You have to contemplate the world. You have to think about why you are here, what your purpose is, and so on. So philosophy was at the center of it. And then they said, there are 2 big bodies of knowledge that people have to know to be liberated and free, so that they can do anything. They can start somewhere and become anything they want. And those are power over language and power over numbers. So they took language and they broke it up into 3 subjects. And they said the 3 subjects are grammar. So you needed to know the kind of how words came together in a structured way. Dialogue, so you'd have great communication skills. Unfortunately, we now call it soft skills. It's hardly soft, as we all know. And rhetoric, which was very much about combining philosophy with language to have structured and logical and reasoning in your communication, and how you communicated and engaged with each other and how you influenced each other. So you had philosophy, and then they added grammar, rhetoric, dialogue, and rhetoric to it. And then on the numbers side, and these three subjects, which were language-related, were called the trivium, to signify the three subjects. On the number side, it was very interesting, and you'll hopefully find this interesting. The first was to combine numbers and manipulation of numbers, which is arithmetic, which we all remember from our BODMAS. In fact, it's been drilled down to us all the way to be taught in grade 1. But you know what? If you really think about even what's happened in the world of behavioral economics, it really boils down to simple arithmetic, and that's the subject of another day. The second subject that they took was geometry, because they said numbers and space. So to describe the world, you needed geometry, and so they said, very elegant way to describe this. And then they said numbers and outer space would be astronomy, so astronomy became a subject. And this one was the most intriguing one, was numbers and time. And so they added music to the liberal arts. And so they called this the quadrivium, which is the 4 subjects. So the 4 quadrivium subjects associated with number, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. The trivium subjects associated with language, which was grammar, rhetoric, and dialogue. Centered by philosophy, the 8 subjects became the liberal arts. And these liberal arts subjects became the subjects that would liberate you. So if you were growing up at that time in Rome and you were born into a family of goldsmiths or miners or masons, you would, if you were considered smart enough or if you were bright enough, then you would be sent to get a liberal education and freed up from the confines of your profession. Now, why am I wasting your time with all this boring history? I think we are in the same stage now. Pankaj, you talked about 6 careers. I think the same holds for us today. I was talking to Shobna today. I'm meeting her for the first time. I heard that she heads emerging markets growth strategy, Bertelsmann investments. And what would you think she studied to get there? You think she had a degree in business, finance to do Bertelsmann investments? You think that she probably studied international finance or, I don't know. What would you even teach somebody who does that? Interestingly, she studied mathematics at LSR College right here in Delhi. And I'm sure when she was studying mathematics at LSR, all these assessments that people came and did on her and the psychometric tests they did on her, they predicted that one day she would be one of the top executives at Bertelsmann around the world. I know some of you are laughing and smiling. We know that, all of us, each one of us sitting here. I studied metallurgical engineering. What am I doing here talking about online education or Ivy League education? It has nothing to do with anything I studied or majored in. My PhD was actually in robotics. A lot of people don't even know that. My IIT friends still remember me with my IIT JEE rank, where they think I was not smart enough to have done a PhD in anything. And because I'm a business guy, I must have gone and done an MBA somewhere. I think the world has changed so much that it doesn't matter what you major in. It doesn't matter what you actually got in your grades. It doesn't matter whether you grew up in a slum and did the tinkering lab. That's what has happened to us, where truly anyone can do anything. Now, you might think that it's early in the morning and I'm here to make some cute statements and inspire you, but look at each one of you yourselves. What did you do? What did you study? And where have you reached? And how come you've been invited to come and sit here or speak at this conference? You've come so far from where you were, and it's because you had the opportunity. We all have the opportunity, and your education, which you kind of acquired by yourself, was able to do that. I think we have to approach the new Ivy League university in India from that perspective. how can anyone do anything? What is the kind of education that enables anyone to do anything? I know that, I will never be a neurosurgeon. I always wanted to do brain surgery on people. I know that I can never play, World Cup cricket for India. And of course, I'm not talking about that. But I am talking about somebody who aspired to be a bus driver. When I used to be asked when I was a kid what would be an exciting profession, for me at that time, the most exciting profession was to drive a bus. And from there on, I went on to study engineering, to do a PhD, to become a failed professor, to do a management consulting job, to lead a media company, to become a failed entrepreneur, to now try to be an entrepreneur again, to build a university. Who knew I could do all of these things? Now the question is, can we build that kind of belief? Can we build that kind of confidence? Can we build that kind of commitment and determination in everyone to be able to reach those kind of goals and success in life? I will end by only saying that I believe that the combination of what is liberal arts today, or a liberal education today, which helps build your cognitive, your social, your behavior, your communication skills, combined with, of course, the technical skills that you need. The world has become complex and does need technical skills, delivered online, which truly democratizes education, is probably the new liberal arts university that India needs. And I think India can show the way. I think we really do have to believe that we have the opportunity to completely change the way education can be delivered. And I think from that angle, this conference is a great start, and I hope you persist with it. I hope you just don't do it as a one-off thing. I will tell you a small story, and then I will end. And the story is of me growing up in Patna, where my father used to be very apologetic. He never used to say that he used to run a business. He used to say that he's a writer, and he was a writer. But the truth is that he had a small printing press, and it was a business. And he used to publish books, and these were children's books. They were books on math, English, and these were actually for some of those of you who are here from schools would know that these were books for the kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth kids. And I didn't know in those days, it was a fun thing for me over the winter break, that we used to carry these books with calendars, with lots of gods on them, and diaries, and pens. In those days, it was hard to get a ballpoint pen. So a ballpoint pen, diary, calendar, and these books. And over the winter vacations, we would go from village to village, trying to find where the school teachers were, because the schools were closed, so the teachers would not be in the schools. They would be in their homes. And it was called canvassing. It was marketing. And we would go and we would show them the books and say, could you please prescribe these books to your children? It was a small business. And I never knew what I was doing. It was fun for me to go around the villages around Patna and in different parts of Bihar. Today, I'm selling a different kind of book. And I think the way books revolutionized education, the way blackboards and chalk revolutionized education, the way microphones and recording and now playlists and iPhones have revolutionized music, I think education is going to get revolutionized in the same way. To make it very specific, I'm now involved in a new startup, and this is the first time I'm talking about it. It's called Harappa Education. Some of you know about this who follow us on social media. And we think this is the new liberal education that we need to provide, which is the focus on 5 habits. And these habits are the habits of thinking, solving, communicating, collaborating, and leading. And leading not as in leading others, but as in leading yourself. The idea being that really what makes you successful in life, what really takes you from anybody to do anything, makes anybody do anything, as many of you are doing, is really these 5 sustained, relentless, ongoing habits. The habits of being able to think right in different situations, the habit of being able to problem solve, the habit of being able to communicate, and the habit of being able to collaborate, to work in teams, and then to lead, and to lead yourself and to grow yourself. Now, you may see that this sounds very esoteric. I believe that this could be as revolutionary as liberal education was in the times of the Romans, and I know that sounds pretentious, but it is not, because these are not my ideas. This is what you all keep saying. This is what you say when you recruit somebody. This is what you say when you say you are providing education, or how education needs to change. And all we are doing is collating all of that and saying, can we take this, and can we now go out and sell it to teachers, parents, students, just as I used to go around selling those books in those days. And to me, that's the vision that is carrying the idea of Harappa forward. In speaking to you today, I have actually employed, without you realizing, 3 things. And some of you may be aware of this: logos, ethos, and pathos. How many of you know about logos, ethos, and pathos? A few hands are going up. Logos, ethos, and pathos was actually propounded by Aristotle 3,500 years ago. These are called Aristotle's appeals. Why is it that only a few of us know about it, if it can be so powerful? By the way, Aristotle didn't come up with logos, ethos, pathos for public speaking alone or for senators and kings. He said these are the simple ways of making communication effective. Logos is obviously about logic and reason and what we often rely on. Ethos is just credibility. Oh, this is Pramath Sinha. He's built some institutions. I kept referring to my experiences to drive my credibility so that you can at least say that I'm not just being a gas bag. And pathos, by telling you stories of my childhood, walking around as this little kid in the winter vacation selling books, I got your attention. Aristotle said this 3,500 years ago. Now, why is it that every kid in India, everyone in India should be taught this? And how difficult is it, this idea that it can't be taught? And why is it so difficult that it can't be taught online? I just want to leave that thought with you. I think we are sitting on an opportunity that is much, much bigger than any of us. We have a lot of problems in our country, and we can often get bogged down by it. But I think all of you who are in the room are taking a very constructive approach to it. And I just encourage you to not allow that to get you down. Thank you very much.